Wedding morning. There was no rain in New York that morning, only clear, cold air that made the city feel freshly washed. The skyscrapers stood still, as if listening, and distant windows shimmered softly, as though even they were afraid to disturb someone's happiness. Claire Morgan looked at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize herself right away. The dress fit perfectly, white, light, embracing her body as if it hadn't been sewn by measurements, but by her breath. Her hair fell in soft waves, carefully styled, a delicate clip holding a strand near her temple so nothing would fall into her eyes. Her makeup emphasized her light eyes, making her look older. But inside, Claire still felt like a girl who couldn't believe she was finally allowed to be happy, allowed to be loved, allowed to be chosen, allowed not to be afraid. She ran her fingers over her collarbone and held her breath, as if she feared that one deeper inhale might make the moment crumble like powder slipping through her palm. In the next room, stylists and bridesmaids bustled about. Someone laughed softly, someone adjusted the bouquet, someone whispered, "Claire, you look stunning." But the voices felt distant, like music behind a closed door. Inside, there was only one thought: today we become a family. The wedding was planned for the evening in a venue on Manhattan overlooking the city and the river, too beautiful to be real, too perfect for a story that had begun so simply, with work schedules and business calls. She smiled faintly, remembering how it all started, with calendars she organized for him weeks in advance, with coffee, no sugar, with his constant, "Claire, can you?" and her calm, familiar, "Of course, Mr. Cole." Mr. Cole. Her heart still tightened sometimes at the sound of it. She was used to being beside him always, in the office, during negotiations, on planes, in cars, in elevators where silence felt too close. She was used to watching him hold his composure before the world, confident, controlled, unbreakable. And she was used to seeing something no one else saw: how tired he became, how alone he loosened his tie and suddenly turned into just a man who sometimes needed someone to say, "I'm here." Ethan Cole was not a man who fell in love easily. 31, CEO of Cole and North Capital, a holding company uniting investments, development, and technology projects. His name was known in New York. People whose signatures appeared on the front pages of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal greeted him with respect. He had a private corporate jet, personal security, and a schedule where even minutes were accounted for. And yet, he had done the impossible. He had chosen her. Not because he had to, not because it was profitable, not because families had decided it. He chose her because one late evening, when the office was empty and the city beyond the windows glowed black and gold, he suddenly looked at her not as his assistant, but as a woman beside whom he could finally breathe. Claire closed her eyes, just for a second, to hold on to the warmth of the memory, the first time he kissed her by the window of his office. No words, no drama, as if it were the only right decision he had ever made. She opened her eyes and saw herself again in the mirror, beautiful, confident, almost unfamiliar. "Claire?" a voice sounded behind her. She turned and froze. Ethan stepped into the room quietly, as if afraid to disturb her world. He was wearing a white robe, not yet dressed for the ceremony, yet even like this it seemed impossible to catch him looking ordinary. His dark hair was neatly styled, a light stubble shadowed his jaw, making his gaze even more mature, more dangerous, and unbearably magnetic. He came closer and stood behind her, looking at her reflection in the mirror. "You have no idea," he exhaled softly, "what you do to me." She smiled, and suddenly fear crept in, not because he was near, but because happiness can be so intense it feels as though it must be punished. I tried," she said lightly. Ethan leaned down and brushed his lips against her temple, brief, tender, the way one touches something loved more than life. His hand settled on her waist, and Claire felt that he wasn't just holding her physically.
It was as if he were holding the entire world in place so it wouldn't collapse. "I don't want to let you go for even a second today," he said quietly. "Then don't," she whispered. She turned to face him. Their eyes met, and for a moment Claire became that girl again, the one who had dared to believe. Ethan traced his thumb along her lower lip, as if checking that she was truly there, real. The gesture was so intimate that warmth rushed to her cheeks. "After the ceremony," he leaned closer to her ear, his voice dropping to a low whisper, "I'm stealing you away. We'll leave before everyone else, and I'll finally do everything I forbade myself to do while you were just my assistant." Claire held her breath. She knew exactly what he meant, and her chest tightened with sweetness and ache all at once. "Ethan," she whispered. He smiled at her reaction and kissed her, not on the lips, but just below, where her pulse beat. Claire grabbed his shoulders to steady herself. It lasted only seconds, but in those seconds lived everything: promise, power, love. His phone rang sharply, foreign and cruel like a blade against glass. They both froze. The call that changed everything. The sound of his phone cut through the air, sharp, foreign, almost cruel, like glass shattering in silence. They both froze. Ethan glanced at the screen and frowned. Claire saw the shift immediately. The way the man who had been whispering promises moments ago disappeared, replaced by the CEO the world knew. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This is important." He stepped away to answer. Claire watched as his face hardened, his shoulders tensed, the way he listened without speaking. "What do you mean urgent? Today?" A pause. "Rome?" The word sounded wrong, like a mistake. Claire felt something inside her tighten. Ethan looked at her then, and in that look was exactly what she didn't want to see on her wedding day. Calculation, responsibility, a decision forming. He covered the microphone with his hand. "Claire," he said softly, "I need to fly to Rome." "Why?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. It trembled anyway. He listened again, nodded once. "If I don't sign the documents today, the project collapses. It's a board-level deal. They need my signature now. Otherwise, everything falls apart." Claire stared at him, unable to believe this was happening now, on this day, in these minutes. "Ethan," she stepped closer. "But—" "I'll make it back," he said firmly. "I have the jet. 5 hours round trip. I'll be back before you even have time to be scared." "5 hours?" she whispered, tasting the number like something fragile. "But we—" "I know." His voice softened. "I know, love." The word love made her eyes burn. "This is the last time work comes between us. I promise." He lifted her hands and kissed her fingers slowly, deliberately, sealing the promise with his lips. "You'll be waiting for me in this dress." And for a second that intimate spark returned to his eyes. "And when I come back, I'll make you my wife." Claire nodded. She wanted to believe him. She had to believe. Otherwise nothing around her made sense. "I love you," she said quietly. Ethan leaned down and kissed her, brief, firm, as if leaving his mark. "I love you too." And then he was gone. The door closed behind him, and the room suddenly felt too large. Claire stood still for several seconds, staring at her reflection as if hoping it might answer her. But there was only her, a bride who had to keep smiling and continue getting ready. Time began to move strangely. At first, people kept laughing, kept bustling around her, adjusting the veil, photographing small details. Claire forced herself to participate, to nod, to smile. She kept telling herself, 5 hours is nothing. She checked her phone every 10 minutes. The first hour, nothing. The second, still nothing. By the third, she couldn't taste the water she drank. By the fourth, Her hands were shaking, and the stylist asked if she was cold. "I'm fine," she said, though the lie sounded too loud. The 5th hour passed like a thin line that could not be crossed. Ethan didn't return.
The news. The venue was already filling with people. Guests arrived in elegant dresses and dark suits, voices blending into a low, restless murmur. Parents smiled too tensely. Friends exchanged glances, whispering reassurances that sounded forced even to themselves. Claire stood in the bridal room, dressed in white, holding the bouquet with fingers that had gone numb. She kept telling herself it was fine. Delays happened. Flights were delayed. Nothing was wrong. She checked her phone again. No messages. No missed calls. She called him. The line rang, then went to voicemail. She called again, and again. With every unanswered call, the room felt less real, as if the walls were slowly drifting away from her. The door suddenly burst open. Michael rushed in, their close friend, his face pale, his eyes wide, the eyes of someone who had seen something he wasn't ready to say out loud. "Claire," he breathed, "please, you all need to turn on the TV." "What?" Her voice sounded unnaturally calm. That frightened her more than panic would have. Michael looked at the parents, at the people around them, swallowing hard. "Just turn it on." Someone grabbed the remote. The screen lit up. Music, commercials, and then abruptly switched to an emergency broadcast. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. The image on the screen was blurry, shot from a helicopter. Dark water, small boats scattered across the surface. Red graphics flashed across the bottom of the screen. Breaking news. Her mind caught fragments before her heart could stop them. A private jet belonging to Cole and North Capital has disappeared from radar. Contact has been lost. Search and rescue operations are underway. Claire didn't hear the rest. One word echoed inside her louder than everything else. Missing. Not crashed, not dead, not lost forever. Missing. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no!" Someone screamed nearby. Ethan's mother clutched her chest. Claire's own mother covered her mouth with trembling fingers. The room erupted into chaos, voices overlapping, questions without answers, fear spilling everywhere. Claire took a step forward. The air vanished. Her fingers loosened. The bouquet slipped from her hands and hit the floor. The last thing she saw was white petals scattered across dark wood and unfamiliar hands reaching for her from all sides. Then everything went black. When Claire opened her eyes again, the world returned slowly. Blurred faces, worried whispers, the sharp smell of something medicinal. Her phone lay beside her. The screen lit up again and again with the same update. The aircraft has not been found. No contact established. She stared at the words until they stopped making sense. And then, instead of tears, something else formed inside her, clear, sharp, almost frightening in its certainty. If they haven't found him, then he could still be alive. She pressed the phone to her chest. And if he's alive, I will find him. New York did not know how to feel sympathy. The city kept moving as if nothing had happened, buzzing, rushing, glowing with evening lights. Cars honked. People hurried past one another. Cafes opened on schedule. The city did not stop for anyone's pain, and that made it even harder for Claire to breathe. 3 days had passed. 3 days since the wedding dress had been carefully placed back into its garment bag. 3 days since her name disappeared from guest lists and appeared instead in news headlines beside his. 3 days that felt like one endless night. She barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same thing. Ethan turning toward her, smiling, telling her everything would be fine. And every time she woke up, there was only the empty space beside her and a silence that rang louder than any words. The search continued. Helicopters, boats, maps, satellite images.
Officials spoke carefully, choosing their words as if language itself could wound more deeply than facts. We are doing everything possible. The chances, if weather conditions allow. Claire listened and nodded, but inside her there was only one certainty. He is alive. It wasn't naive hope. It wasn't denial. It was knowledge. Quiet, stubborn, immune to logic. She felt him. In the strangest moments, passing his empty office, seeing his unfinished cup of coffee, waking at night with the almost smile of someone who sensed that the person they loved was somewhere close, simply unable to return yet. On the fourth day, Claire went back to the office. Cole and North Capital greeted her with a tense silence. Employees watched her with sympathy, with caution, as if afraid to meet her eyes. Some whispered that she was strong. Others whispered that she was only 25. Claire walked the corridors steadily, even though her legs trembled beneath the calm surface. She entered his office. Everything was exactly as it had been that last evening. Papers neatly arranged, the laptop closed, a framed photograph on the desk, the two of them together, taken the night Ethan told her he wanted to spend his life with her. Claire picked up the frame and allowed herself exactly 1 second of weakness. Then she set it back down and straightened her shoulders. "We continue working," she said at the first meeting. Her voice was calm, almost businesslike. "Every project moves forward. No contract will be lost." Someone wanted to object. Someone wanted to say it was too soon. But the way Claire looked at them made it clear. This was not a request. She became the interim head of the company. Not because she had dreamed of it, not because she was ready, but because it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Work kept her afloat. By day, numbers, meetings, calls. By night, loneliness, and his name whispered into the dark. Sometimes she caught herself speaking to him silently. "I'm holding everything together. You would be proud of me. Just come back."
Pain was the first thing he felt. It was dull and deep, spreading through his body as if he had been falling for a long time and never quite stopped. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of damp earth, smoke, and something bitter and herbal. He tried to open his eyes. It took effort. Above him was a wooden ceiling, darkened beams, a thin blade of light slipping through the cracks between the boards. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know who he was. He tried to move, and a groan escaped his throat as pain exploded inside his head, sharp and merciless. "Easy," a rough voice said nearby. "Easy, son. Don't fight it." A face appeared in his blurred vision, an old man, deeply lined, gray-bearded, with eyes that held no fear, no surprise, only calm, tired, steady calm. "You're alive," the man said simply. "That's already something." He wanted to ask questions. What happened? Where he was? Why his body felt chujim, as if it no longer belonged to him. But the words wouldn't come. Darkness claimed him again. When he woke the next time, night had settled outside. A weak oil lamp glowed in the corner of the room. The old man sat nearby, slowly grinding something in a small bowl. "Your plane went down," he said without looking up, as if he were talking about the weather. "In the mountains. A miracle you survived." "Plane?" The words sounded distant. It stirred nothing. "I found you alone. No one else made it." Something tightened inside him. Not a memory, but the weight of loss without images. "What's my name?" he asked quietly. The old man looked at him carefully. "You don't remember?" He searched inside himself and found only emptiness. "No." The old man nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "It happens. You took a hard blow to the head. Memory is a fragile thing." He handed him a cup filled with warm liquid. "Drink.
You need time. Time moved strangely. Days blended into nights. The old man, Lucas, cared for him patiently, speaking little but never leaving him alone. He cleaned wounds, applied compresses, fed him bitter herbal infusions. Slowly, he began to sit up, then to stand, then to step outside onto the porch. Mountains stretched endlessly around the cabin, forests, mist rising every morning from the valley below. He knew there had been a life before this. He knew he was not an ordinary man. He felt it in the way he held himself, in the instincts that guided him even through weakness. He remembered numbers. He remembered deals. He remembered cities. He remembered that he worked, that he made decisions. But the last year of his life was gone. There was a blank space where something important should have been. At night, staring into the darkness, he sometimes felt a quiet pressure in his chest, an ache without a name, as if someone was waiting for him, as if he had left something unfinished.
Claire had learned to live in two modes at once. By day, she was composed, precise, almost cold. Meetings, signatures, negotiations, she had learned to say no with the same calm confidence she once used to say, of course. People in the conference room looked at her differently now, no longer as an assistant, no longer as the grieving fiancée, but as the woman holding the company together while everything else threatened to collapse. By night, she became herself again. She sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the lights of New York that no longer looked beautiful. They simply existed, like breathing, like pain you grow used to because there is no other choice. She reread old messages. Not all of them, only the ones where he wrote briefly, almost casually, but where every line carried the same meaning. I'm here. Sometimes a thought crept in that frightened her. What if he comes back, but not the same? She pushed it away. It was too terrifying to let that question take root. In the mountains, time moved differently. He sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the fog slowly spill down the slopes. His body still ached, but the pain had become familiar, background noise rather than the center of everything. The emptiness was worse. You had a woman, Lucas said one day, setting a mug of hot herbal tea beside him. He looked up. I can feel it, he admitted, but I can't remember her. Memory doesn't always return at once, the old man replied calmly, and sometimes it doesn't return at all. He clenched his fingers. I remember someone else, he said after a pause, from before. The words came slowly, as if pushing through fog. She was part of my life. We were supposed to get married. Back then, before. Lucas said nothing. I remember her face, her voice, her name. The name surfaced clearly without effort. Victoria. He said it and felt nothing, no warmth, no pain, just a fact. I want to call her. I need to understand who I am. Lucas looked at him for a long moment. Do what you think is right, he said at last. Just remember, sometimes the past comes back not to save us. He didn't understand what the old man meant. He took the phone Lucas had given him, old, simple, with weak signal, but the name was clear in his mind. He pressed call. Victoria Hale stared at the screen, unable to believe what she was seeing. A name she hadn't seen in months, a name she had almost erased, a name that belonged to the past. Ethan. She answered almost immediately. Ethan? Her voice trembled, just enough. Victoria, it's me. Where are you? She breathed. Everyone thinks you're... I'm alive, Ethan cut in. I need your help. That was enough.
The elevator doors opened quietly. Claire looked up and froze. He was standing there, alive, real, so close that the air seemed to vanish from her lungs. For a single, fragile second, the world narrowed to his face. Thinner, paler, a faint bruise along his jaw, the familiar shape of his mouth, the same line of his shoulders, everything she had memorized with love. Ethan, she breathed. He turned toward her, slowly, carefully, as if she were a stranger stepping into his personal space. His eyes met hers and slid away, searching, uncertain. She took a step closer, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. "It's me," she said softly. "Claire." He studied her face with polite attention, not recognition, not relief, curiosity. "I'm sorry," he said, at last, his voice calm, distant. "Do we know each other?" The words struck harder than any blow. Claire felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Behind him, a woman stepped closer, dark-haired, perfectly composed, her hand settling possessively on his arm. Her touch was confident, practiced, as if she belonged there. Claire noticed it instantly. The way the woman leaned in, the way she watched Claire without warmth, the way she smiled, thin, controlled. "Yes," the woman said smoothly. "We've met. Claire works here." Works here. Claire's breath caught. She looked back at Ethan, searching for something. Confusion, doubt, anything. There was nothing. "I didn't know," he said simply. "I've been away." Away. As if he hadn't vanished from her life. As if she hadn't spent weeks waking up with his name on her lips. "I was your fiancé," she said quietly. The silence stretched. Ethan frowned slightly, as if trying to solve a problem he didn't remember assigning himself. "My fiancé?" he repeated. The dark-haired woman tightened her grip on his arm, just enough to be noticed. "That was before," she said gently, "before the accident." Ethan nodded slowly, accepting the explanation without resistance. "I'm sorry," he said again, turning back to Claire. "I don't remember you." Claire felt something inside her crack, not loudly, but deeply. She forced herself to straighten her shoulders. "That's okay," she said, even though it wasn't. "I remember you." Ethan hesitated, as if something in her voice brushed against a place he couldn't reach. But then he stepped back, and the distance between them became real.
After that first meeting, Claire realized something frighteningly simple. Pain could be quiet. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She didn't ask him to remember. She lived, as someone who carried a fracture inside, invisible but permanent. Ethan officially returned to the company a week later. There were handshakes, polite speeches, careful smiles. People talked about miracles, about second chances, about strength and survival. Claire stood beside him, calm, professional, perfectly composed. She watched him closely and saw everything she remembered. The way he listened, his head slightly tilted. The way his fingers tightened when he thought. The pause before he spoke, as if measuring the weight of every decision. Everything was still there, except her. They worked together again, only now there was a distance between them that words couldn't cross. "Miss Morgan," he said during their first meeting, his tone formal, controlled. She met his gaze. "Mr. Cole." The sound of his name landed sharply between them. He noticed it. She did too. Claire didn't push him. She didn't show him photographs or beg him to search his memory. She chose a quieter path. She trusted the body more than the mind. She brought coffee into the conference room, the same way she always had. No sugar. He took the cup without thinking. Then paused. "That's strange," he said slowly. "This is exactly how I drink it." Claire smiled faintly. Some things don't change. She scheduled meetings at familiar restaurants, chose the same routes through the city, let the same music play softly in the car when they traveled together. And every time she saw the same reaction. He didn't remember, but he slowed down, listened, held her gaze a second longer than necessary.
Sometimes she caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, and when their eyes met, he would look away, unsettled, as if he had crossed an invisible line. One evening, after a late meeting, they were left alone in the conference room. "You and I," he began carefully, "we were close, weren't we?" Claire didn't answer right away. "We loved each other," she said simply. He exhaled, long and slow. "And his brow furrowed, "I'm supposed to feel something?" The question cut deeper than silence ever could. "You do," she said gently. "You just don't know what it is." He nodded, as if that explanation made sense. But that night, he didn't sleep.
The change in her was impossible not to notice. That morning, Claire walked into the office different, composed in a new way. Her dress was darker, her hair pulled back, her movements calm and deliberate. She no longer searched for him with her eyes. She no longer lingered. She was living. Ethan noticed immediately. Something tightened inside him when she passed by without stopping, without that familiar quiet attention that had somehow become part of his days. "You look different today," he said when they crossed paths near the elevators. "Just a good morning," she replied. She smiled, not at him, at someone else. The feeling that rose inside him was sharp and unfamiliar, irritating, unreasonable. "What's his name?" he asked before he could stop himself. Claire turned toward him slowly. "Does it matter?" The question caught him off guard. "It shouldn't," he said after a pause. "I was just asking." "Then don't," she replied softly. She stepped past him, leaving behind the faint trace of her perfume, the same scent that always unsettled him without explanation. That evening, Ethan stood by the window of his apartment, watching the city lights blur into one another. Victoria moved somewhere behind him, speaking about schedules, doctors, recovery plans. He barely heard her. All he could see was Claire's calm smile. All he could hear was the tone of her voice when she said, "Does it matter?" His chest felt tight, as if something inside him resisted the quiet order of his life. He took his phone and stared at the screen for a long moment before typing. "I don't remember who you were to me, but I can't stop thinking about you, and that scares me." He sent the message before doubt could stop him. Across the city, Claire's phone lit up. She read the words once, then again. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, the tears came, not from pain, but from the fragile, dangerous hope she had been afraid to name. After that message, something between them shifted. Claire didn't reply right away. She let his words stay where they were, honest, unsettling, too real to be handled carelessly. Ethan became more attentive, quieter. He no longer pretended that Claire was simply part of his workday. His gaze lingered longer than it should have, his voice softened. His questions turned personal, even as he seemed startled by his own openness. "I feel different around you," he admitted one evening when the office was nearly empty, "as if I'm breaking rules I don't remember agreeing to." Claire listened without interrupting. "You're not breaking anything," she said calmly. "You're just being alive." But Victoria was there more often now. She began to move faster, more decisively. "We need stability," she told him one afternoon, spreading documents across the table. "The doctors say stress is dangerous, uncertainty even more so." She took his hand, firmly, confidently, like someone used to claiming what she believed was hers. "Let's get married," she said evenly. "Again." Ethan hesitated. "Now?" he asked. "Before you start doubting," she replied with a faint smile. He agreed, not because he wanted to, but because he didn't see a reason to refuse. When Claire found out, the world dimmed for a brief, silent moment.
She stood by the window of her office, phone clenched in her hand, feeling a strange, cold calm rise inside her. "So this is how it is," she whispered. She didn't cry. She decided to play. Daniel had always been there, quietly, reliably. He had known her too long not to understand what she was doing. "Are you sure?" Daniel asked when she told him her plan. "It's just a game. Formalities, signatures, nothing more." "You want him to be jealous," Daniel said softly. "I want him to remember," she replied. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said at last. "I'll help." He didn't say the one thing that mattered most, that he had loved her for a long time.
On the day of the registration, Claire was frighteningly calm. The dress was white, simple, without any excess. Her hair was pulled back neatly. Her face showed no fear, no hesitation, only quiet determination. She kept repeating it to herself like a spell. It's just signatures, just papers, just a game. Daniel stood beside her, steady and composed. He glanced at her more than once, as if hoping she might change her mind. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. "I do," Claire replied. "I need to." The room felt too bright, too official. Every sound echoed: footsteps, voices, the rustle of documents. She signed her name without trembling. Across the city, Ethan sat in a dimly lit bar, staring at a glass he hadn't touched. Music played softly in the background. Laughter rose and fell around him, but none of it reached him. "You look like someone who's losing something important," his friend said, watching him closely. "I don't know what it is, but it feels like I already have." His chest felt tight, restless. Images flickered through his mind without shape or meaning. A smile, a voice, the curve of a face he couldn't place. He checked his phone. Nothing. He drank, trying to silence the unease crawling under his skin. Back in the registration hall, Claire placed the pen down. The papers were almost finished. She felt it then, a sudden heaviness in her chest, as if something inside her was bracing for impact. She closed her eyes for a brief second and signed the final line. The blow came suddenly. A sharp shove, a flash of pain, the sound of fists, voices raised, chaos folding in on itself. Ethan staggered, tried to stay upright, and then his head struck hard. The world went white. And then it shattered. Memories rushed in without mercy. Claire standing in front of the mirror, white fabric, soft light. Her laughter, her voice saying his name, the plane, the promise, the ring. "Claire," he breathed. He pushed himself up, clutching his head, his pulse racing as if his heart had finally remembered its own rhythm. "Oh God," he whispered, "I remember." He didn't stop to explain, didn't stop to think. He ran. The city blurred around him as he pushed through daylight, through noise, through everything that tried to slow him down. His breath burned. Blood trickled from the cut above his brow, warm against his skin. All he knew was that he was late. The doors to the registration hall were open. Voices echoed inside. Papers rustled. A pen scratched across the page. "Claire!" he shouted. She turned. Time seemed to stop. She stood there in white, her hand still near the documents, her face pale as she looked at him, broken, breathless, real. "I remember," he said hoarsely, taking a step toward her. "I remember everything. You, us, the wedding, the way you looked at me that morning." The room fell silent. He reached her and wrapped his arms around her as if letting go might erase her again. "I was too late, I know, but I couldn't stay lost. Not when it was you." Claire pressed her face against his shoulder, her fingers trembling as they clutched his jacket. For a single moment, nothing else existed. And then she realized the papers were already signed.
The world didn't fall apart all at once. It did it slowly, as if giving her time to accept that everything had already happened. Claire sat in the car without taking off the white dress. The fabric pressed against her shoulders, heavy, almost suffocating, as if it wasn't clothing but proof, something that couldn't be undone with a single breath. The ring on her finger felt cold, foreign, completely unrelated to love. Ethan sat beside her in silence. From time to time he looked at her as if he were afraid she might disappear the moment he looked away. "I'll fix everything," he said at last, his voice rough, too serious to be comforting. "I swear." Claire turned her head slowly, as if any sudden movement might break her completely. "Do you understand that this can't be fixed anymore?" she asked calmly. "This is something we have to live through, and then live with." Ethan nodded. He did understand. She didn't cry. Something inside her switched into a cold survival mode, the same one she had used during crises, negotiations, moments when emotions only made it harder to stand upright. "I need to go home," she said quietly. "I need to take this dress off and understand who I am now." Ethan exhaled. "I'll go with you." "No," she replied softly but firmly. "Not today." He didn't argue, because for the first time he saw it clearly. Love wasn't always about staying close. Sometimes it was about giving someone enough space not to fall apart.
The next morning, Claire walked into the office as someone else. Her hair was neatly styled, her posture calm and precise. The white dress was gone, replaced by clean lines and neutral colors. No one looking at her would guess what she had signed the day before. She entered the conference room and felt the shift immediately. Victoria was already there, perfectly composed, dark hair smooth, makeup flawless, her expression cool and controlled. Everything about her spoke of certainty and ownership. Ethan stood near the window, hands in his pockets, tension visible even in stillness. "You remembered," Victoria said, looking at him. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Ethan replied, "and you know what that means." A thin smile appeared on her lips. "So you chose her again?" "I always chose her," he said quietly. "I just lost a year." Victoria turned her gaze to Claire. "You really think love erases consequences?" she asked calmly. "Do you think memory makes everything clean again?" Claire met her eyes without flinching. "I don't want things to go back," she said. "I want them to be honest." Ethan stepped closer to Claire, the movement small but unmistakable. "Victoria, this is over." Victoria's smile widened slightly. "It's not over," she said softly, "because she has a husband." The words landed like a controlled strike. Claire didn't look away. "It was a mistake, and I will end it legally." Victoria straightened, adjusting the sleeve of her jacket. "We'll see," she replied. She walked out without turning back, leaving behind the faint trace of expensive perfume and unfinished threats. The room fell silent. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. Claire looked at him steadily. "I don't want your pity. I want your honesty, always, even when it's uncomfortable." He nodded. "You have it," he said. Daniel appeared a week later. Not the confident man she remembered, but someone thinner, tense, his movements uncertain. He stood in the courthouse corridor, avoiding her eyes, as if looking at her directly required more courage than he had left. "I'll sign everything," he said quietly. "I just needed time." Ethan stood beside Claire, his presence steady, unmoving. "What you needed," he said coldly, "was to understand that running doesn't erase what you did." Daniel swallowed. "I loved you, Claire," he said, his voice breaking. "And when I saw that you chose him again, I lost control." Claire looked at him for a brief moment. "Love doesn't give you the right to trap someone," she said softly. "It doesn't excuse lies."
Daniel nodded and picked up the pen. The sound of it moving across the paper felt louder than it should have. Sharp, final. A line drawn where there had once been confusion. When they stepped outside, daylight wrapped around them gently. Claire was no longer dressed in white. She wore a simple, modern coat, her hair loose, her face tired but clear. She stopped, slipped the ring from her finger, and studied it for a brief moment, not with anger, but with understanding. Then she closed her hand around it and let it go. Ethan waited. He didn't rush her, didn't touch her until she looked up. "It's done," she said. "Yes," he replied. "It is." They stood side by side, not holding hands, but closer than they had been in a long time. "I don't want to rush. I want us to start again, honestly." Ethan nodded. "I don't want you because I remembered. I want you because I choose you." Claire smiled, small, real, unguarded. And together they walked away from the courthouse, not back to what they were, but toward what they were finally ready to become.
Time passed. Not much, but enough for the pain to lose its sharp edge and for memories to stop feeling dangerous. Claire stood by the window of her apartment, watching the city slowly sink into evening. New York no longer pressed in on her. It breathed with her, calm, steady, alive. Ethan was in the kitchen, cooking dinner, carefully, concentrated, like someone doing something important and not wanting to get it wrong. They didn't move in together right away. They didn't rush. They didn't pretend nothing had happened. They chose each other again, every single day. "You know," Claire said quietly, still looking out the window, "sometimes I'm still afraid." Ethan stepped closer, not touching her at first. "Me too," he answered honestly. "What if you hadn't remembered?" she asked softly. "What if that moment never happened?" He thought about it. "Then I would have found my way back to you anyway," he said at last. "Maybe not immediately, maybe not so dramatically, but my heart would have led me to you." Claire smiled. She turned toward him, and there was no doubt in her eyes now, only quiet certainty. "I don't want to live on what-ifs anymore. I want to live by choice." "So do I," he replied. They got married a year later, without rushing, without running, without anyone else's expectations. A small ceremony, a sunny day, a warm breeze, a few people they loved, and a city that had witnessed both their loss and their return. Claire stood in front of the mirror once again, but this time everything was different. She wasn't shaking, she wasn't afraid, she wasn't waiting for disaster. Ethan came up behind her and gently placed his hands on her shoulders. "This time," he said softly, "I'm not going anywhere." She laughed through her tears. "And if you do," she answered, "I'll know you're coming back." He met her gaze in the mirror. Always. Sometimes love doesn't begin beautifully. Sometimes it breaks, disappears, gets lost. But if it's real, it comes back, not as a memory, but as a choice, every day.